We're now going to hear about the Pollinator Promotion Act.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brendan Chapko, and today I will be presenting our team's final briefing for the New York State Pollinator Promotion Act. As we are fast approaching Thanksgiving, and I'm sure many of you already have grocery lists growing out of hand, I wanted to start our presentation here in the produce aisle. Without insect pollinators, this is what that aisle would look like. More than cranberry sauce and apple pie, around 75% of the world's food crops rely on pollinators for reproduction. In fact, a recent study from Cornell found that the value pollinators provide to New York agriculture is worth more than $400 million per year, equivalent to the salary of several thousand farmers. Of course, native pollination is more important for wild plants than crops, but the exact amount is hard to quantify. Now that I have you all on the side of pollinators, it's time for the bad news. Unfortunately, across the world and across New York, pollinators are in crisis. My team spent much of the summer researching the science behind pollinator declines, and we believe there are three critical factors driving that crisis in the state. The first major challenge that pollinators face is habitat loss. As urban environments expand, there are increasing damages associated with habitat fragmentation, where sections of viable habitat are separated. Of course, whether native grasses are replaced with roads, cornfields, or even European-style lawns, human development creates deserts for pollinators, who rely on taller flowering plants for both food and shelter. Even in areas with flowering plants, improper land management can place undue stress on pollinators. An important example of this is plant type. Native plants are particularly beneficial for native pollinators after millions of years of coevolution. However, all too often, these productive plants are outcompeted by invasives or intentionally replaced with ornamental plants. More directly, humans kill pollinators through the improper application of pesticides. Many chemicals found in the most common pesticides are highly toxic to non-target insects, including pollinators. Exposure can cause behavioral impairment, infertility, deformation, and death. These causes of pollinator decline are further catalyzed by a knowledge gap. Currently, scientists only have accurate data for around 1% of known pollinator species, and increasing this figure is difficult, as entomology is a largely underfunded and understaffed field of study. Beyond the professional level, there is also a pervasive lack of public awareness around pollinator needs and their services. Many people who will say that we need to save the bees will find equally important moths, wasps, flies, and beetles distasteful. In concert, these factors have contributed to a 45% decrease in global insect population since 1980, with the Empire State Pollinator Survey of 2022 finding that between 38 and 60% of local pollinator species are losing population currently. Despite this cause for alarm, there are only 4 laws in New York that specifically address pollinator health. That is where the New York State Pollinator Promotion Act comes in. The New York State Senate is making an effort to fight pollinator decline through the Pollinator Promotion Act. This bill aims to boost insect populations through improving habitat composition, habitat management, and public awareness. As it will be important moving forward, just know that when I mention proper pollinator land management, that includes the use of native plants, reduced mowing, and cutting pesticide use. In our view, the Pollinator Promotion Act comes with significant downsides and opportunities. The primary limitations include a reliance on voluntary action. The language of the bill encourages public schools, universities, and highways to incorporate pollinator-friendly practices, which is great, but nothing is mandatory. Consistent with this, there are no direct funding mechanisms included in the language of the bill. Also, agriculture is not tackled, which is the largest burden on pollinators in New York. However, there are important upsides. By focusing on the creation of guidelines, the PPA can define what pollinator-friendly practices are, laying the groundwork for future initiatives, and making existing grant funding available for pollinator projects gives stakeholders a financial incentive to participate, which we see as the most important aspect of the bill. Our team has spent this semester working on a 2-pronged program design for the Pollinator Promotion Act that will maximize outcomes through improved municipal land management. First, we propose the creation of a pollinator-friendly land management certification program for any private or public lands in New York State above 2 acres. There will not be funding with this program. It instead serves to educate land managers and communities on what pollinator-friendly practices are. Trainings and technical assistance will be provided to assist in the educational aspects of the goal, or educational goals of the bill, and each project will be publicized by the Department of Environmental Conservation. Next, we will take the guidelines established in the certification program and amend the existing Climate Smart Communities grant application to include pollinator-friendly projects. New York State's Climate Smart Communities program helps municipalities adapt to climate change through registrations and fundings across a variety of project types. This year, they will distribute $22 million in climate grants across the state, and our goal is to allocate 10% of future grant funding for pollinator-friendly projects. We envision 4 stages in order to go from legislation to active program. First, we need to define what pollinator-friendly land management is and write guidelines for the certification and grant applications. As soon as feasible, we want to roll out the certification program, providing technical assistance and training as a way to get the word out. When the next round of Climate Smart Communities grants are available for application in 2026, we want to be ready with an official pollinator subcategory. And finally, after projects are approved and underway, we want to actively monitor all sites. Every project will also be published online, as I mentioned. The majority of tasks necessary to complete this program will be undertaken by the new pollinator management team. This project team will be made up of ambitious employees from across the Department of Environmental Conservation. Crucially, given the short timeline and lacking budget of the Pollinator Promotion Act, this choice minimizes the need for new salaries and training. 2 pollinator specialists, our full-time research scientists, will be brought on as the only new staff. Developing a pollinator-friendly land management program relies on knowing what pollinators actually need. These experts will be necessary for writing guidelines, site analysis, and technical assistance. Of course, all of this needs to be paid for. The Pollinator Promotion Act, unfortunately, does not come with its own funding mechanisms, so we decided to use our expected grant funding under management as a basis for developing our budget. We came to a number of $263,820 for year 1. Just a reminder, the majority of this program will leverage existing Department of Environmental Conservation staff and infrastructure. The bulk of our budget will cover the wages of our 2 new full-time employees, as well as any seasonal staff that may be necessary for executing projects across the state, with the remainder going towards trainings, conferences, and other expenses our staff incurs, mostly travel. Making sure that this money is well spent will rely on collecting data through diverse methods. Land management and pollinator impact surveys will be crucial for tracking our most important KPIs. Land management specifically measures what is being done, the number of acres converted into pollinator-friendly habitat. On the other hand, studying pollinators by measuring population counts and species richness will allow us to see if these projects are succeeding. Digital monitoring will tell us if municipalities and individuals are interested in these projects. We will track both applications and visits to project publication sites. Finally, we will conduct interviews with staff every application cycle to see what is working and what needs improvement. To conclude, the Pollinator Promotion Act aims to address an important issue in the pollinator crisis. However, its limited scope and lacking funding make its goals feel lofty. The PPA can maximize impact by targeting community projects, as this simultaneously addresses pollinator habitat and public awareness, and the lack of available data on pollinators makes any efforts uncertain. However, we hope that expanding pollinator habitat through our program design will allow future data collection to be easier. I want to wrap up today with a quick request from all of you. Next week, when you're sitting down at the Thanksgiving table, surrounded by friends and family, and someone asks what you're thankful for, give pollinators a shout out. They certainly deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. I'm going to jump off of a question that Alex asked of my group and pass it on to you. So given that it's hard to collect data on pollinators, how should these communities measure their success? Aside from saying, I used to have a field that was totally mowed, and now I've got all of these pollinator plants. How do we track if this is actually working?
Yeah, I think that's really important and one of the most difficult aspects of dealing with insect pollinators that has been throughout the last 2 semesters. I think what's important about our measuring success is that there are things that communities can measure, like land management surveys, seeing how much land has been transformed, seeing the interest in these projects, as well as community interaction with these spaces. I think the actual scientific data will mostly be collected by the Department of Environmental Conservation, the population count, species richness, although we've discussed other methods of how to get the community involved in that.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation again. So just one curiosity, like we are living in the world of artificial intelligence today. So is there anything which talks about artificial pollination?
Yes, there is artificial pollination, and I think that would be especially useful for agriculture in the case of the pollinator crisis getting worse and native pollinators can't support agriculture. However, there isn't as much financial interest in supporting natural landscapes as there are for apple orchards and cornfields, so that's more focused on the private agriculture side and not the protecting the beauty of the natural landscape.
Thanks, Brandon. For the Climate Smart Communities grant, I think that's a great idea, but 10% is pretty significant. So do you anticipate that there could be any pushback to that amount as you're trying to include the program?
Yes, we expect quite a bit of pushback. I think it was a recurring frustration that the bill doesn't include its own funding. Obviously, if there is pushback, we might adjust that number down. That's a goal number rather than something we're confident in being able to secure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.